Good day, ladies and gents, and welcome wherever you are around the world to Splendid Isolation number 171, at which point I'm going to stop and deal with my boomer tech issues. So forgive me for a few seconds. Excellent. I think that's it. Okay, sorry, ladies and gents. I was just dealing with my boomer tech issues. I don't have 15 screens in front of me like some streamers do. I've got like one not very good laptop. So there we go. All right, guys, welcome to Splendid Isolation number 171. I do believe we're going to see the return of Ashman this evening. He assures me he's going to be on us shortly. Don't know who else we're going to get because, as always, when I do my streams, I ask people to join and, they do or they don't, basically. So there we go. Had a bit of controversy around the channel this week, but I'm not going to go on about that too much because I just think that particular twat just wants attention. But whatever, it is what it is. So while we're waiting for a guest or two to join us, please feel free to ask any questions you have. I will try my best to answer them. If you have any, of course. Yeah, I mean. I would like to make it clear, I am not a basket weaver. I've never been to anything that involves basket weaving. On the other hand, I know many people that do basket weaving, some of whom are my friends, and as far as I can work out, they're all pretty good blokes. Like, they'll do stuff like go for a countryside walk and then have a couple of beers in the pub at the end of it. Don't think it's really something that MI6 or the CIA need to get really upset about, to be honest with you. But that's just me. Okay, so I guess I have to keep talking. Oh, this week's thumbnail. This week's thumbnail is a Royal Navy steam and sail corvette known as HMS Scout. And these ships were built for the Crimean War between Britain and Russia in 1854 to 1856. Some of them did actually see action in the Crimean War. A lot more of them saw action in China later on, in Chinese waters. One of them, at least, was the flagship of the Australian station for a while, and I think she was actually replaced by another Pearl-class corvette. And HMS Scout's most famous thing was that in 1874, she was sent to Hawaii from Liverpool to go and observe a transit of Venus, astrologically, something like that. Anyway, she was sent out there. It took her 4 months to get there via Valparaiso in Chile. And that was her most famous thing. Although she did also, as you can see in the painting, she did also do a bit of fighting in Chinese waters when the Chinese were trying to get uppity with the Brits, which we generally didn't allow them to do, and quite rightly, in my opinion. But there we go. Okay. Well, I hope I get a guest or two. We'll see, I suppose. If anyone in the chat has got any questions, while I haven't got any guests, I'm more than happy to try and answer them if I can. So if you've got any, ask, and I'll try to answer. Pum, 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 pum. I guess I should have done that. Okay, that's done. Alaman, how you going, mate?
Yeah, could you?
Yeah, not bad, mate. You rescued me. I was running out of things to talk about.
You sound like you got
I'm
a bit of
not
lag
very good at
still.
temporized talking about. It could well be, mate. Honestly, this computer is not a very good computer, and I try my best to make it better, but it only can go so far. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine that's more your internet, but I don't know actually. But what did you want to talk about today?
I don't think it is my internet. I mean, honestly, like I do. Well, did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up?
I mean, there's been some general observations, like people. I have to head this off by saying that people don't like you talking about the Overton window shifting, apparently, because they say it's not a victory, which is true. It's not a victory, but the Overton window is indeed shifting, and it's hard to put a finger on why. This week we saw, who was it? Someone from the Bank of England, I believe. I'm going to have to double check this. Coming out and saying that about the effect of immigration on the economy.
Yes, it was a Bank of England, mate. Yeah, I remember that.
Just going to find out who it was.
I believe it was the Bank of England. I think it was. It was a civil servant associated with the Bank of England, I believe, who pointed out that, no, this is not going to save people's pensions because most of them don't work.
Yeah, he said Bank of England chief economist Hugh Pill has confirmed that mass immigration is having a devastating effect on property prices. Rents are up 9.2% from last year alone. There's actually something I used to post a lot, which was a study from Spain. And funny enough, if you ever posted this to someone who was like pro-EU, they would then point out the fact that this study's from Spain and therefore isn't worth anything, apparently, which is kind of funny to me. But and the study basically pointed out that they took I think it was like a 9-year time span. So between 1998, it's a 10-year time span. Between 1998 and 2008, the average Spanish province received an immigration inflow equal to 17% of the initial working age population. We estimated that this inflow increased house prices by about 52% and is responsible for 37% of total construction of new housing units during this period.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it, that it's taken them all this time to understand that supply and demand is indeed a thing.
But I mean, on top of that, if you look at the vast, unending flow of mass immigration into nations like Britain, for example, but many others, a great deal of that immigration is dependents, and nearly all of those dependents never work at all. So they don't make any money whatsoever, but they cost the country quite a lot of money in terms of, in Britain's case, the National Health Service, and obviously in terms of benefits and all the rest of it that people get in the UK if they're not at work. It's incredible to me that this was ever thought a good plan, because it just isn't, I mean, even if you just don't care that the whole of England and Britain, as like the sort of nations that they are, is going to be destroyed, which inevitably mass immigration is going to do. Even if you don't care about that and you just look at it in pure economic terms, for every economic migrant that we allow into the UK who does work, usually some shitty job like taxi driver or Uber driver or whatever it might be, generally those people have like half dozen dependents who never work but do cost British taxpayers quite a lot of money.
Well, yeah, I mean, I saw
that's
talking
just
about
obvious,
talking about dependents. I saw something the other day where it was like, I think for March, for the month of March, this was when it peaked. But care for every care visa they gave out, one of those carers coming in brought on average 5.5 dependents. And of course, I mean, a lot of people try and make out that that's like partner children, but in a lot of instances, like I remember seeing a stat that between, I think, 2008 and 2017 or something like that, the average age in Britain actually increased, not because of the aging population, but because of dependency visas from immigration. So in a lot of instances, it's actually them bringing in their parents or even grandparents.
Yep, 100%. Totally agree, man. Yeah, it's just nonsense. I just don't understand how any intelligent person can believe that this is true, that somehow when you bring in one mostly semi-educated migrant from the third world and half a dozen of their family, this is going to somehow save older people's pensions. It's not. It's a con. It might keep it going for a couple of years more, but it's a con. It's not. In the end, the whole thing is going to fall flat, and
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, I'm of the opinion, and this is a bit more, not spicy is not the right word, but it's a bit more, I suppose, contentious. But I'm just of the opinion that they never intended for this to be any economic benefit. Like, generally speaking, immigration has broken down existing communities and power structures that existed outside of the government, and that was the goal. And I suppose some peripheries of the government kind of bought into the lie that it was going to bring economic benefits, but I don't think most of the architects behind this actually gave a shit. I mean, you think back to the whole rub the right's noses in diversity and stuff like that under Blair. I think a lot of our political elite, because they are, I'm going to use that distinction, because they are foxes. I think I think a lot of them, especially later in the game, they become sort of more driven by spite. And you can actually see this with with Sadiq Khan winning recently. Anyone that's on Twitter or on social media, but you could even see it to a lesser extent on like the news, they became very, very belligerent when like Sadiq Khan comfortably won his seat back. And of course, all of us know it wasn't ever really in contention, because of course, they've literally just replaced the voting population of London with one more amicable to them. But because the sort of state is run in this sort of perpetual revolutionary mode, whereby they keep their vanguards and their sort of foot soldiers constantly on the move by feeding them this narrative that they're punching up and fighting back against some fascist dystopia that's just around the corner. And I think that's dying out anyway. You can go and look at like Stand Up to Racism protests, or even the Fabian Society meetups, and it's just all old people. It's just like very, very old pensioners in there. But because of that, you've got this system where these people, you know, the tiniest little threat to like liberal regime hegemony, and they get incredibly affronted. You know, you can even see this in America. You know, when the Roe v. Wade was being overturned, like a guy shows up at Justice Kavanaugh's house to like, you know, try and kill him and his family, or bring harm to him and his family. So, and you kind of look at these people and you think most of these people are like lower middle class, petty bourgeoisie. Like, why would they be this involved? But of course, they're sort of bought into it on a sort of almost a personal level.
Yeah, no, look, I don't disagree with anything you say there. I mean, you know, we have all seen the elderly in their 80s, supposed vicar, female vicar. I don't think there can be female vicars, but you know, she claims to be, and an even older of a woman. I mean, maybe they're elderly lesbians. I don't know, but they're certainly elderly women, just smashing the glass over the Magna Carta, and like, that's irreplaceable. If you break that or you spoil it, you can't replace it. It's hundreds of years old, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a security guard there with a walkie-talkie, and doesn't even try and stop him. He doesn't even try and stop him. He doesn't like just. And I'm not suggesting he has to be violent to old ladies, but he could take away their chisel or their hammer, you know.
Yeah, and it's particularly funny as well because
it's happening.
Yeah, like, but like even the implication that like the executive board at BP are going to be sitting around in this dark, shadowy room surrounded by cigarette smoke, and they're like, they did it, guys. They damaged the Magna Carta, or they damaged a Rembrandt at the you know, whichever gallery. It's like, you know, oh, you know, that we're really gonna have to tone back this drilling now. You know, it's like it just so happens that the sort of you know, that the same corporate leaders that these people claim that they're fighting back against also either don't care about this stuff or just don't give a damn. Like that stuff's there. Like the idea of going after these cultural and historical icons that's for the purpose of sort of like just attacking us, not us as like the dissident right, but like us as like the British people, you know, or whatever sort of Western people.
Celtic traditional British people, 100%. Us as the Anglo-Celtic traditional British people who've been the people of these islands for thousands of years. Yeah, absolutely, it is.
I mean, there's a point that Alexander
and the government
Adams
just
makes.
says, yeah, you're allowed to do that. That's why security guard doesn't do anything. It's because the government doesn't want them to.
Yeah, but it's like it's Alexander Adams makes this point in one of his books. I think it's Iconoclasm, and he talks about how like during the Iranian Revolution, they like people went through the palace and they like daubed paint over the face of the busts of previous Iranian leaders, or they like cut at the face on the portraits. You know, this idea of sort of like attacking these particular icons, and then lo and behold, you go to the Cardiff National Gallery, and they've got oh bollocks, what was his name? The Napoleonic, one of Wellington's commanders, who was Welsh.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, you're talking about oh, bloody hell, I'm trying to remember his name now.
Wasn't Picton, was it?
General
yeah,
Picton.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was General Picton. Yeah.
So yeah, and it's like and they've got like the Picton box. I mean, in that instance, they haven't slashed his face or anything, but they've put him in a crate and like on the floor, in sort of like a weird humiliation ritual. So yeah, very just purely out to just humiliate and spite people. And you can see this as well if you talk to these people. If you ever meet someone who works for like one of these NGOs, it will, no offense to anyone listening, but it will be like usually like a young woman with a graduate's degree, with an undergrad's degree, and and they have this idea of like the gammon in their head that they're upsetting by putting up like a BLM or an LGBT thing, and they're sort of living for that rage, for that anger that they incite in people. And funny little thing, if you turn it to mockery, they will. I mean, I've literally had one of them cry, but not that I had many opportunities to do this. I'm not exactly well honed at it, but yeah, they don't take well to switch into a mockery angle, which is by the by, I suppose.
I'll give you an advantage. I'll give you an example, Alan. In Australia, and this was in Australia. This was in Victoria, Australia. I used to have a girlfriend a long time ago now, like I don't know, 2012, somewhere around then. And she had a best woman friend who worked for an NGO, and she had to go over to Haiti because they had an earthquake over there, and she went over there and spent 6 months there doing lagresse and supposedly being Lady Bountiful and all this kind of stuff. Turns out though, which had nothing to do with that story, she had a white Australian boyfriend who killed himself because she wasn't a very nice girl.
Oh, good Lord.
And she and my girlfriend at the time used to take the piss out of this white Australian Australian boyfriend who killed himself. They used to think it was funny.
No.
They thought that was funny. And and my girlfriend at the time had slept with every single one of her friends of both sexes. So I mean, so yeah, they're lovely people that left. They really are. They're nice, except when they're not, and then they're really not.
I mean, it's kind of funny as well because they're always going around. I mean, like, who is it that says it's always projection with the left? But they do this thing whereby they'll talk. There's a quote that they like to throw out a lot. I don't know where it comes from, but they say like, a lot of people will essentially be on your side if you just promise them the idea that they'll be able to be cruel to other people. And you kind of sit there and you're like, whoa, that's some fierce projection there. And I do wonder if sometimes if that maps onto a timeline, if there's a point at which movements start to only take victory as the amount of mockery or humiliation they can put onto another people, because you don't see this in every sort of era of history. I mean, you can look at, slightly different thing obviously, but you can look at, and I'm sure you've seen this, if you look at like British military, like colonial history, there's a lot of instances where we fought people who were pretty vicious enemies. And even if you take the most ardent critic's opinion on a lot of those instances, it's very hard to find opinions of like the British being sort of posthumously barbaric to a people who've been defeated. Often we were actually quite soft.
No, we generally not. No. People will sometimes tell you. I mean, one war I know a lot about, because I used to run battlefield tours all around it, and I used to live there, was in the Anglo-Zulu War. And people will sometimes tell you that after some battles, the British used to kill the Zulu wounded, and this is true. We did. Sometimes. Not always, sometimes. But if you were a British guy and you were captured by the Zulus, you were going to get tortured and murdered at best.
Yeah.
Right? They never took any prisoners. They never, ever, ever took any prisoners. Not one. There was one French dude who claimed he was captured by the Zulus, and everyone dowered him afterwards, and so do I, because I don't think he was. I think he just claimed it.
Yeah.
If you were surrounded by the Zulus, the best you would get was killed immediately, although mostly you'd get tortured and then killed. So, yeah, I mean, you know what? You fight the enemy, and if you're going to look at it, look, quite a lot of Zulus were actually captured by the Brits and treated. Not true of any British people. Not one. You know, really not true. Never happened. But yeah, there's so much hypocrisy in the modern world, and it's all because you know, all races are equal, all races are the same. It's just not true. I mean, you know this, Alan, and I know this, but I suspect most of our audience knows this, but it's just not true. All races are not equal. All races are not the same. I'm sorry, they're not.
Well, yeah, I mean, you say that though. I mean, here's a conversation that's been coming up a lot recently. Is this thing with Ireland, with the immigration situation in Ireland? A little bit of a mini segue, I suppose. But obviously, like one of the arguments that I've seen going around a lot is people are saying that, like, obviously the Irish are just more fighty than the Brits or than the English because they're not accepting this stuff lying down. I have a little bit of a problem with that because, the regime worked quite hard to put a lot of this sentiment away. You know, I mean, UKIPper on Twitter actually posted up recently that if you looked at like Rotherham just 10 years ago, they were having to close down large parts of the town because of like quite aggressive protests at the time, because of grooming gangs and the rest of it. You didn't have to go that far back to find, like, you know, people always look at the I know you're not a fan of the old sport ball stuff, but people are always like to kick off about the old football hooligans and we'll go, oh, why can't they have this sort of anger for what's happened to their country? And it's like, well, they did. Like, the football hooliganism was a real core of, they were a real core behind, like, you know, you had like the Burqa bashers and all sorts of other things coming out of that era. You know, they generally didn't do this stuff lying down. And
look, I mean, Adaman is an 18-year-old British soldier. As an 18-year-old British soldier, the first posting I got was to Northern Ireland. So, and you know, I was in Northern Ireland around the time when the lovely Lady of Shalott was a very small girl. Yeah, like I was a 18-year-old teenage soldier when she was a little tiny girl. And I'd like to think to myself sometimes that part of the reason Lady of Shalott didn't get killed in the 1980s was because there were guys like me, not me, but guys like me in the British Army who were often teenagers, willing to stop the IRA doing that, the provisional IRA doing that bullshit. So,
yeah. But it's like, do you think that the Irish are actually a more fighty people than the English? I mean, I could imagine there's probably a little bit more, I don't know, some type of aggression there. There's definitely some small differences between like English people and Irish people. I think they're pretty small. We're pretty closely related otherwise. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't think the English are less fighty. I think, you know, they've been hanging murderers in England for a long time. I think they've been trying to make the English less aggressive for a long time. Are the Irish more fighty? No, I don't think so. I think, you know, the right group of Englishmen would beat the wrong group of Irishmen for sure. So, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
Someone in the chat, who I strongly suspect is not a friend of mine, says, "Did you yomp from Goose Green to Stroud Hill?" I was never in the Falklands War, mate. I joined the British Army the year after that. And on that note, you can kind of not talk for a while. But anyway, yeah, I was never in the Falklands War. Never said I was either. Wasn't in the parachute regiment either, or the Royal Marines. I was in the Queen's Regiment, guys. But there we go.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
the one benefit I think that
gently benevolent here is right. Carry on.
Takes the English a little longer to kick off, but they're just as fighty. Yeah, I mean, I generally think that like, for example, the one benefit the Irish have. I mean, again, I was talking a little bit ago about maybe there's like timelines to how regimes start to move. Is that like the Irish are kind of going up against a similar elite in their own country to what we have here. Like, even though they're kind of 20 years behind in a lot of other ways in terms of the immigration, a lot of the actual, general policies and that. The actual elite is actually fundamentally the same as every other globalist elite everywhere else. So they're in this new mode, and instead of these, these fighty Irish young men coming up against a hardened Irish state that's doing mass amounts of subversion and surveillance and filling every organization with a million grasses, they're instead running into like what we deal with now, which is like the remnants of something that's already gone through that time frame, but without the time frame. And you're getting these elites that are coming out and just like repeating the slogans. Oh, they just have to understand that love is love, and and shit like that. And it's like, it's kind of I suppose a little bit easier for them to organize a resistance at the present time, but they're also sort of unorganized because this is still quite a recent event for them. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, but I think I don't want to sort of like be a critic of the right. I think we've done some pretty amazing things, and we've come from nothing to a pretty strong position considering our opposition. But I do think that a lot of people in the British right kind of they kind of almost like it's almost as if a lot of the anti-Anglo stuff, the eternal Anglo stuff, almost comes from like people we should be able to see as fellow Anglos, who just kind of want to lambast and
some of it,
sort of roll around in the mud and decry the fact that they can't be in a better age. And it's like, well, you're all here for it. We understand.
I think the Irish, Adam, and I think the Irish establishment, the Irish globalist establishment, is less sophisticated than the British one is. I think that's an advantage to the Irish patriots. And don't get me wrong, the true Irish patriots who are trying to stop mass forward immigration into Ireland, they have my 100% support, right? But on the other hand, you've got like Sinn Féin, which is the political wing of the Provisional IRA, which really is just Brits out, Somalians in. They totally support the replacement of the Irish people. But the true patriots in Ireland who are trying to fight for the real Irish people, they totally have my 100% support. And the bit of an advantage they have against the guys in Britain is the Irish government is not, the Irish globalist government is not quite so sophisticated as the British globalist government in like supporting that. That's the one bit of an advantage they have. Are they more fighty? No, I don't think they are. I think the Brits are equally brave myself, but then of course I'm an Englishman. Although my mother was born in the Republic of Ireland, but I think Anglo-Celts are good people. So that's just my view.
Yeah. So Mitch says, what say you two on what Steve Law said about that when Labour get in, they're going to massively reduce immigration and ease the housing market because Tories were inept at boiling the frog too quickly. Yeah, like I
Or
actually had a
what do
little
you say?
mini. I had a little back and fro with a mutual of mine on Twitter a couple of weeks back called Jeremy Norman, I think, and I was basically saying that I actually almost think that it depends on how much Labour win by. Like, on one hand, like a 600 seat Labour victory would almost be a disaster for Labour, because like a lot of those people say that the Corbynites have been put away, and in terms of like the upper echelons of power in the party, they have, but to fill all those seats, they have a lot of people in there that are just old Corbynite activists, dumb university students, stuff like that. They would just end up with this party that
Yep.
this sort of that wants to be radical in about 50 different directions. It would tear them apart. If they can win by a small amount, where Starmer can have this sort of unified elite around him, I think he's going to try and do like a sort of probably go along what Steve Law said, kind of with a Blairist paste over the top of being the sensible moderates. They're going to probably size back some of the excesses of immigration. I could imagine it, but of course immigration generally is still going to continue. It will just be maybe at a more moderate pace, and they're going to massively up house building, I imagine, but it will be horrific quality Dino new builds thrown up by cheap migrant labour.
Yeah, look, I'm no fan of Labour, I got to say. I do kind of support the 0 seats for the Conservatives thing, but you know what? Labour ain't any better. As far as I'm concerned, Labour and the so-called Conservatives, they're a unipie. They're a unipie.
Yeah.
Not much different.
Yeah.
But the idea that Starmer's going to be better, I don't. I like Steve Laws, and I do follow him on Twitter. But yeah, I don't think he's right about that. If anything, I think immigration will go higher under Starmer, but that's just me.
Yeah,
I could be wrong.
I mean, like one of the problems I used to come up with, that I used to run into, like physically myself, was that, and I'm kind of diverging slightly from this subject, but the problem was that if you try to invest people into something, like you might go and say to them, like, we'll get behind like the Tories, but it will just be for like this specific thing, or we'll just get behind like UKIP, but it'll only be for this specific thing. For this specific strategy that's done in the short term that ends with maybe something that's you could say meme worthy or something like that. But then the problem is people would actually they'd get caught up with the crowd and they get caught up with the energy, and next thing you know, like these two guys that were supposed to be like joining your local Tory club so you could do something kind of dissident are actually now just full on Tories. They've kind of like taken up some high Tory positions, and they're kind of going along with it. And they kind of tell themselves all sorts of weird copes as to why they can do this. But people like the feeling of winning. And if they end up in a party and they get that, that actually is going somewhere, which is, the Conservatives aren't going anywhere now, but there are times when they are, and there are times when Labour are, and stuff like that. People can get caught up in that feeling, and they will have all sorts of weird ways of justifying this themselves. And I do sometimes worry when you look at there's a very fine line I think you need to tread between like promoting 0 seats and getting it so there are genuine areas of the country where like spoiled ballots gets more votes than the actual Labour candidate who ousted the Tory candidate.
100.
Yeah. And then there's the next bit of that, which is that some people actually get in on this strategy where they're like, oh, we can actually move the Labour Party more easily than we could have with the Tory Party, and therefore I'm now all in on Labour. It's and you see this in other ways as well. So like there's someone, I'm not going to name names because I don't want to like start drama, but I've seen arguments where people will say that like, the unions or this left-wing group and that left-wing group or Clement Attlee were like secretly really based. And they've just been subverted sort of since Tony Blair. And it's like, you can go back and you can look at like the union position on things like the 1960s Race Relations Act. I can't remember the exact year, like 68 or 66.
They
something like
weren't
that.
based. They were not based.
No, not at all. You know, they were. There was a few unions at the time that were pessimistic, and kind of sat on the fence, but they either sat on the fence or they sided with the Labour government over it. None of them like went against the Race Relations Act. And you can look at other things on this, like
it
Enoch
was a
Powell.
Marxist. It was it was a socialist Marxist thing, Adam, and the guys who sat on the fence did so because they wanted to come out against it, but they couldn't because it was a socialist Marxist thing.
Yeah, race communism. But
I mean, that's the truth of it. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
I totally agree with everything you're saying. I do totally agree with everything you're saying.
But yeah, when I made my back when I was making videos on my own channel a long time ago, which I will get back to, but and I made this Enoch Powell video, and I remember coming across this clip, and it shocked me, and I didn't download it, which still annoys me to this day because I haven't been able to find it again. But it was with one of these red outlets like the Socialist Worker or something like that, and they were interviewing a guy who was a organizer for the Dockers Union when Enoch Powell made his speech. And of course, people came out in solidarity with him. And this guy was literally in this video trying to make out that that actually those people coming out on the side of Enoch Powell were like backed by the elites, and it was all astroturfed. And his tiny little counter protest with like glossy signs was actually the real counter. Was actually the real sort of yeah. Was that? And he was saying that his like little counter protest with their glossy signs.
Like, he wasn't astroturfed, I can tell you.
No, absolutely not. And you know, and he sits there and makes this argument, and I look, and they go into like the whole history of like how the unions fought back against Powell, and I'm like, this is, you know, this is insane that even back then, a lot of these guys at the very top of the unions, like they slightly played lip service to the workers, but they were just like full on, you know, just communists all the way through. And even at that point, totally embedded with the regime.
A modern, Adam, could I give you a modern simile for what happened in the 60s with the trade unions and Powell? If you watched the recent nonsense a couple of years ago with the China virus stuff, the tradies in Australia, the ordinary tradies, not the unions, but the actual guys who were members of the union, they did a massive march, and more than one, but they did massive marches because the Labour leader of Victoria in Australia was trying to stop them working unless they got the jab. So they did massive marches. Some of them even took their families with them. And the Labour leader of Victoria, Australia, set the anti-terrorist police against them with armoured vehicles and tear gas and rubber bullets. And I'm not even joking. Like, you'd think it was crazy, but yeah, they did. And eventually, many of these tradie unionist guys ended up outside the offices of their unions, trying to break into them and get hold of the scumbags who were running the unions. Which of course the Victorian police didn't like at all, because the Victorian police were totally in support of the union leaders. And I think it was very much like that when Powell was doing his stuff. The ordinary trade unionists were absolutely 100% behind Powell, just like my dad was, you know. But the leaders, different. That was different because they were into political power, you know.
Yeah.
I think that was the basic difference. I mean, in some ways, it's this top-down stuff that we talk about quite often, but the ordinary union members were totally in support of Powell, just like the ordinary union members really didn't want to have to get China virus jabs, but the leaders of those unions were not ordinary people. What they were elites, effectively, who were like against the ordinary people, you know?
Yeah, 100%.
That's my view, anyway.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, you even kind of get this on the other side. Like, obviously, I would like to be able to side with, you know, the based old lord from the 60s. You're going to find a few, but even those guys, the system under which they lived kind of bent them slightly to the right, which is why that system was largely gotten rid of through things like the estates taxes. But they spent a lot of time in London. They spent a lot of time in those metropolitan scenes. And even if they weren't approached specifically through universities and sort of brought into this stuff, a lot of those guys ended up just being massive shitlibs too, which was a real shame.
The other thing, Armin, the other thing you've got to know about the British old-time aristocratic elites is that the end of them was mostly World War One, because like all the best people, all the best British guys died in World War One. Whether you were an aristocrat or you were middle class or you were working class, the best of all those guys, you know, the most aggressive, most willing to fight, they got killed the quickest, obviously, because they were the guys willing to go forward and say, "Follow me, boys," and all this shit, you know. So all of those guys, they got destroyed in World War One, and the little bit of the British aristocracy that did not get killed in World War One, they were killed in World War Two. Yeah, usually fairly early on, for the most part. And on top of that, of course, you had all the economic policies that destroyed them as well. But I mean, that's different. But honestly, people will argue with me. They'll say, "Oh, British losses in World War One weren't that great." Well, they were, because for the whole of Britain and the Old Commonwealth, which is to say Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and back in those days, South Africa, it was a million dead, pretty much, and a lot more wounded, like 2.5 times.
A lot of them were like
wounded.
the bravest and the most competent as well.
The guys who got killed, they were the first guys to volunteer. They were the first guys to lead an attack. And it doesn't matter if they were aristocracy or middle class or working class, they were the best of all those people who got killed.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I made that Bowden edit about World War
just the best.
II or World War One. Sorry, there was a one of the arguments that I saw people saying in like comments when I put this up on TikTok was a lot of people were trying to go with the argument that well, a lot of those people were conscripted and they didn't get a choice. But if you go and look at the recruitment numbers, you know, which I had a quick look to just on Wikipedia, like it's shocking just how many people did just volunteer. Like it was almost the case that conscription might not have actually been needed, just because a vast majority of the numbers of soldiers were volunteers.
In Britain particularly, but it's also true in Canada, Australia, New Zealand. The guys who joined, and they joined early and got killed early because they were in enough battles that it got them killed. Of course, they were the volunteers. The guys who joined when conscription was in were the last guys to join, you know?
Yeah. And most of them got put on farms anyway, because you could choose to go and do farm labor instead.
Yeah, it's just not. It's a nonsense, Alan. It's just a nonsense. The best guys volunteered, and of course, in 1914, there was this situation where, like, the whole thing was, of course, you'd go and fight for your country because your country was great, you know, and you would, and so all the best guys immediately went and volunteered. There's a great film. There's a great novel, I should say, called Covenant with Death, which I recommend everyone goes and checks, about the guys who got killed in 1916 on the Somme. And it really is this dude's best book. But yeah, it's like the good people all volunteered early, and it didn't matter if you were Lord so-and-so, or you were some middle-class guy who worked in a bank, or you were a working-class guy who came out of a mine or worked on a farm. It didn't matter. The best guys all went and volunteered very early on, and mostly therefore got killed, you know?
Yeah.
To people who don't understand this are dimwits as far as I'm concerned.
I'm sure Alan Brooks makes this point in some of his various texts where he says, I think I've gotten this third hand, so
He does.
I could be wrong on this. But yeah, he basically says that every
does.
time there's like a military disaster.
You're talking about the chief of the Imperial General Staff in World War II.
Yes.
You're talking about Alan Brooke, the chief of the Imperial Staff in World War II. Yeah, absolutely. He does. And he's correct.
Yeah. And like every time there's a disaster,
Alan Brooke who spent most of World War II. Yeah, he spent the whole of World War II trying to argue idiot Churchill out of most of his stupid schemes. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and he sits there and he goes, like, every time there's a big disaster or something goes wrong, he's like, how could this happen? Then he's like, we lost most of our best minds, previously, and I'm kind of dealing with, the second tier who still won a war, but it wasn't. There was just so much talent lost in there.
Oh, mate, look, if you look at British soldiers in World War I, they almost never surrendered. Like, they could be outnumbered and cut off and outnumbered 100 to 1 for 4 weeks, and they wouldn't surrender. They never surrendered. The German army even said British soldiers never surrender. World War II, not quite the same, but in World War I, because that was those guys, they were the best guys in the country.
Yeah. There's in that Max Hastings book.
Yeah, and Alan Brooke was correct.
Yeah. Yeah, in that Max Hastings book, Das Reich, he actually mentions, I think, in that that the Germans kind of thought it was a little bit disappointing that from when they encountered British troops in World War II, they were kind of much more ready to surrender than German troops have kind of been led to believe from records of previous engagements sort of in the First War. And indeed, I've made this point so many times on this stream, but if you go and look at, if people go and read Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel, he really, from World War I, he really portrays British soldiers as being like these absolute super soldiers. There's a bit where he's describing this Highland soldier leaning over the trench and it's such an embellishing description.
Yeah, 100%. Look, Storm of Steel is a great war book. And this is a German dude who actually kind of liked World War I.
Yeah.
I think that would be a fair description of the guy. But he was not a big fan of the National Socialists or Adolf Hitler, which the National Socialists didn't like very much because they wanted to make him a hero, but they couldn't because he didn't like them much. He was much more of an old supporter of the German Kaiser. He would have much preferred like a Germany with an emperor. But yeah, as you say, and he says constantly all through the book, British Army, that was bloody hard. We fought against the British Army. British soldiers, they were the best soldiers we fought. Always, all through the book. It's a constant theme through the whole book. And I suspect very strongly, rightly, but and Alan Brooke, of course, the British chief of the Imperial General Staff in World War II. He was a young officer in World War I, and fought in the trenches. One of the big heroes that we like to talk about in the West is Tolkien. Tolkien fought on the Somme in 1916. He got that stuff. He understood it. But the best of our guys died in that bloody, stupid, useless war.
Yeah.
Against somebody who was not our enemy anyway, really, in the sense of Germany,
Yeah. But that's, suffice to say, that doesn't have to mean that Britain, or indeed large parts of Europe, as some people like to believe, have been turned into a sort of genetic dead end. Like, there's still more than enough good material back in the British that you could sort of recreate the Anglo in its sort of full glory once again.
I totally agree with that, man. I totally agree with that. I not even a slight, tiny argument for me. If we could get our birth rates up again, and instead of funding a health service, we would have funded a Royal Navy, etc. The Brits could be as great as they ever were, but we would have to change quite a lot, and we would obviously have to end that first world immigration.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you do about the birth rates thing. That's such a rabbit hole to go down. But like, I used to make the argument that you could economically incentivize it, and I think, I mean, both on this stream and off, I think I'd spoken to Rupert about this on like 2 different occasions, Rupert August, and a few others, and I mean, they're kind of the opinion that you can't just economically incentivize your way out of it. And looking at the data now as it's started to unfold, you can do a little bit, but it's not enough. And like, as Mitch says, I think some level of allowing the population to decline is not actually a bad thing. Like we were never, I mean, when we were conquering the world, we were never, an enormous mass of people. We were always quality over quantity, always.
I always agree with that. I don't think Mitch is right, but if we turfed all the immigrants out, Britain couldn't revive, because I think we could. If we could do that,
even if you got rid of all the
immigrants, a bit of re-immigration would help a lot.
I mean, I think he's arguing more that we'd still have too high a population density.
Well, maybe. I look, me, I'm a re-immigration supporter. I think it's gonna have to come. If it doesn't come, then obviously Britain's gonna die. But I'm a re-immigration supporter. But I think Britain's natural population is like, I don't know, maybe 56 million, something like that. That's her natural. If we could keep it round about that, that would be large enough to provide a big enough Royal Navy that no one would mess with us, and a big enough army that it could defend British shores and the few remaining overseas British places like the Falklands and Gibraltar, and an RAF that was big enough. We could do all that if we was, somewhere around, I don't know, 54, 56 million, maybe. We don't need any more people than that, for sure. Which would allow us to actually get rid of some of these vile, estates of houses that are being built now on former Greenbelt land and this sort of thing. But that's just me.
Yeah.
Mitch is saying England was more prosperous, 1500 than 1300. That might be so, Mitch, but I mean, even so, the population then was, I don't know, not even a quarter of what it is now. I don't know what it was. I don't know if you do, but
no.
it wasn't
I mean,
even
Robert,
1500.
Robert Toombs in his book The English and Their History. I doubt Mitch would like him because I think he's quite pro-Norman, but I think he broadly makes this argument. He kind of seems to imply that like 1450 was like peak England. Like he doesn't say it, but like when he goes through some of the data, like people in 1450 were only like 2 inches shorter on average than we are today, which was like, you know, astoundingly tall for that time period, you know, relative to other large other
there are
parts of the
arguments
world.
about that, but yeah, all right.
Well, yeah, but generally
I
speaking,
think
his
there are
argument is just
arguments
that,
about that, Adam.
yeah, but he's mainly just saying that like someone in 1450 ate surprisingly well compared to what we might think they did.
Oh yeah, no,
and they were
I'm agreeing with you. I'm just trying to. I totally agree with you on that, but I'm just trying to say that like the thing was all through the 18th and 19th century, for example, was the British Army wanted recruits from the country because the country recruits, because they got better food, were taller, yeah, and bigger guys, more stronger guys. And yeah, I'm totally willing to believe that the average Englishman in, say, 1415, at the time of the Battle of Agincourt, was probably not that much shorter than the average Englishman is today. I'm totally willing to believe that. I think it's probably true. Because he was probably a guy from a village or somewhere in the countryside.
Yeah. Yeah. And but yeah, like this is the thing. I mean, Sonny Jim said we lost the 100 Years' War in 1450. That's the thing. Like we came off the back of like a really bad engagement and a long period of war, and we were still doing better than a lot of English people were in, let's say, like 1700. But yeah, I did once come up with a time frame where it was
look at the Bantam battalions in 1916, mate. Look at the Bantam battalions in 1916 when they're trying to get British guys from the middle of crappy very seas who are like 5 foot 0, 5 foot not much, into the army, because we're in this stupid fucking war that we should never have been in the first place. But whatever,
I once came up with a time frame. I can't remember what it was. I think it was like if you'd been born in like 1520 and you lived to 1580, you get to see like the first works of Shakespeare and the works of Christopher Marlowe. And even at that point, I think literacy was at like 40%. So you'd probably also be able to even read and partake in that stuff if you were like if you were able to.
Not so bad actually back then. 40% literacy.
No,
that's not so bad. Back in those days, that was not bad at all, actually. But I'm so biased about this stuff. It's ridiculous. Like I made a post last week when I said I still can't imagine not being born an English or a British man. Because I really can't. I can't imagine how bad it must be if you're not born as an Englishman or a Briton. I mean, I get being a Scot or a Welshman or a Northern Irish person, that's perfectly fine. But imagine not being born British. It would be
well, you get this with
that would be
there's
hard,
that woman. There's that woman, what's her name? Marissa Purkis, I think, on Twitter, like one of these FBPE Remainer types. And she did a tweet this last week, which you used to see a lot, but I haven't seen in a long time, where she was like, oh, just by luck of the draw that you were born in this place, and it's like, rather than over there. And it's like, well, like you can get into the technicalities and be like, well, yeah, but you're a product of your ancestors. Like you're not plucked out of a repository of souls, right? Like your parents wanted you to inherit this. this England, and instead these people are demanding that we give it to these other people. And it's like, but in a sense, though, maybe the better answer is just to laugh at these people and go, "Born foreign, couldn't be me," and just carry on with your day.
Well, that's what I think to a large degree.
Yeah.
And I mean, like I'm not that simple, but serious. I mean, like, I can't imagine not being born in English or a British man. I mean, imagine like how you must feel. You're not the best race in the entire world. It's like crazy to me, but whatever.
Yeah,
I'm not,
and it's like,
I'm
I mean, a lot
not
of those
joking,
people are just.
by the way. Some people think
No,
I'm
I know you're
joking
not.
when I say that. I'm not.
No, I
I'm
agree
being
with you.
serious. It's it's like, imagine not being born English or British. I mean, God, what are you, for God's sake?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I look, that's always been my view. It's never going to change. It was my dad's view. It was my grandfather's view. It was certainly my great grandfather's view. It's not going to change.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That said, of course, legacies
But
even go
yeah,
beyond those immediate.
do I feel sad because we're run by an Indian banker at the moment? Does that make me sad? Yeah, it does. But
yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's like I mean, I
feel sad about that.
I say children, but often inheritance even goes beyond that. Like what something that actually happened this week that made me laugh was I went out, I had a smoke, right, and I'm smoking my pipe, and I'm going for a walk, and I'm walking over to this place on the other side of the village where I live, and as I'm walking back, I'm cutting through the fields because our village is kind of weird. It's two villages that have merged together, but there are fields still in the middle, so it's like a donut shape. It's kind of funny, and I'm walking cross country through the fields, and the farmer is kind of diverted the footpath, which isn't strictly legal, but whatever. He's trying to grow wheat there. And I'm walking up over the top. My grandfather used to know that farmer's father quite well. And and I'm walking along there and I'm thinking it's so weird because he, like the current farmer is a cokehead, right? He's a drug taker. And he wasn't very nice to his wife. So that's all broken up. His wife's actually his former wife is actually my godmother. And he's only got, I think he's got one son and one daughter, and the son has his own business and has no interest in taking over from his father because they've had this big falling out because of his drug problem. And the daughter is still with him, but obviously has no interest in farming. And I'm kind of looking over these fields thinking, like, it's just a matter of time until this guy has to sell up, and then all this will be gone. It'll all be turned into slum housing for immigrants. Yeah, and that's kind of like when people talk about population decline, they say it's not a big deal. That's kind of like, that's kind of like the unintended.
Adam, and I hope you can buy it.
No, it would cost so much money. But then I found out I'm like, I'm going to start preparing for this. So I look into it, and then I just find out from family, because my grandfather used to know the old man quite well, that actually he kind of knew that his son wouldn't look after the farm. So he signed it over into a trust, which means his son can't sell it if he wanted to, and it can't have houses built on it either. So yeah, small white pill for my very small community. Yeah.
Alan, I just hope you can get a group of friends together and buy the damn place.
Yeah, it's so much cool land. It would be many millions.
Yeah, but Adam, get a group of friends together and say, okay, we'll buy this. I mean, that would be the way to go, mate. If you could do it.
Yeah, and Royal Biscuits is right there. They'll push to have it overturned. I think when Michael Gove was housing, so I'm not sure if he still is. I'll have to check. I'm sure that it was possible for him to just overturn that basically with a swipe of his arm. Let me have a quick look.
It's crazy. Yeah, I don't know. I look. What can you say?
Yeah, he's still
These
Secretary of
places
State for
used to
Levelling Up
be where
Housing and
we lived.
Communities.
Yeah, these places used to be where we lived, mate. They used to have like villages, which were our communities, and you would have a market town where people would go once in a while. And I don't know,
Mm.
man. All we can do is fight against this stuff as much as we can, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to do some of that in my own local area. You do get very it's a very hard thing to do though. Like you can to a certain extent you can build things like just more inclusive village structures, but you can't almost morph that into the legal level, which is what's needed to actually hold this stuff together in the long term. Like, really, I mean, this sounds like quite a drastic measure, but you almost need to make it a legal requirement that people that have houses in a village can only sell to other people in that village. And there was actually an example of this in Snowdonia. In Snowdonia, until very recently, there was a cap on how much you could sell houses for, because that was the means by which they stopped, like, foreigners, English people and people from other parts of Wales and Scotland and that, from coming in with enormous amounts of money and driving up the house prices. But the guy that started people have probably seen this. There's like a quarry in North Wales that this guy turned into, I think it's called Zip World, where there's like a big zip line and all sorts of other things. And he basically took this to court and he got it overturned. So you can now sell a house in Snowdonia for any amount of money, whatever the asking price is. And I suppose now house prices there are just skyrocketing. So there's like one example of even in an instance where they kind of brought in these laws through roundabout ways, through sort of legalism, it still ended up getting overturned like quite easily.
That's sad, man. That's really
Yeah.
sad. Like, I don't even know what to say to that sort of thing these days. I look, you know, Alan, like I'm an inner London dude from inner South London.
Yeah.
And like back in the day, Cockneys would have said, "Nah, you're not a Cockney because you have to be born within the sound of Bow Bells and all this sort of stuff on the east side of the river."
Yeah.
But basically, all the people I grew up with were in the South London Cockneys, basically, and generally very, very kind people. Like very kind people. If you were in trouble as a little girl or a little boy, you could almost go up to anyone and they would help you. They would, because just the way they were. Totally destroyed now, mate. All of that has been. There are no Cockneys in London anymore. Pretty much, all destroyed. And when I say Cockneys, I'm not just talking about the East London born within the sound of Bow Bells guys. All of the inner London blokes and women who had that sort of accent, they've all gone. They've all been destroyed and moved out of London, which is why London is no longer English or a British city.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the Cockneys are basically extinct. Like, even to the level of which you find Cockneys outside of London, you're either talking about like one or two here or there, or it's kind of like, I mean, I can't stand this, but it's like a performative Cockney where they didn't live within earshot of Bow Bells or indeed anywhere in that end of London, but because they've lived within proximity of Cockneys that moved out of those areas years ago, in the sort of the London surrounding suburbs, they've sort of picked a mild form of it up from there. It's just estuary English now. I mean, estuary English is just soft Cockney.
Yeah.
And that group is otherwise just dead. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%, mate. Look, Sonny Jim says you have to be weaned on pie and liquor and jelly deals. I never liked jelly deals, but I do like pie and liquor, and I've had it many, many times. And my dad used to take me to one of the oldest pie and liquor places in the whole of London, which was in Bermondsey Street. But yeah, so yeah, I understand that stuff. But like, I just want people to understand that, like, if you were a little kid in the 70s, say, you could go anywhere in London, and if you had problems, didn't matter if you were a little boy or a little girl, if you had problems, you could go up to nearly almost, say you were lost, for example, as small children often get, particularly in big cities. You could go up to almost any bloke or any woman, and she'd turn around and say, "Oh, love, are you?" Or he would say, "Oh, no worries, mate," and they would help you out. That's the way it used to be. It really was, and I'm not lying. It was the true way it used to be. Almost any bloke or any woman would help you out as a kid back in the day, in the middle of London. And these days, of course, you walk around the middle of London, you hardly see a white person, let alone anyone who is a Cockney, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny as well, because before the 2021 census came out, I actually had people like looking me square in the eyes and telling me that London has gotten whiter because of like the gentrification of like one or two neighborhoods. And I was like, no. And they're like, well, you wouldn't know. I work in London. It's like, yeah, I've been up to London enough times myself. I know. Like, I know that's not true. and then of course the census comes out, and it's just like, you know, just the numbers declined even more, as hard as that was to believe. You know, the white British is now in like the mid 30% ish mark, you know. I need to go and use the loo and grab myself a drink. Right. So I'm going to be back in like 2 minutes, but I'll be quite quick.
No worries. No worries. I will ask the chat if they have anything to say. All right, chat. You got anything to say? If it's interesting, I'll answer it. Somebody says, my friend went to London and said it looked like Baghdad. Look, man, I was born in London in 1965, and like eventually when I was, I don't know, let me think, probably about 10, I lived 5 minutes walk from Tower Bridge on the south side. So you couldn't get more inner London. And when my dad allowed me to get a bicycle, which he didn't do until I was 14, because he was desperately worried I was going to get killed in the traffic. But when I was 14, he bought a bicycle for me for my birthday. And I used to like go to Keston Ponds in Kent, which was like a, I don't know, 12, 14 mile bike ride one way. And you do another 12, 14 mile bike ride home. And I used to do that in a day, but I was a fit young boy in those days. So, you know. But yeah, London, look, I didn't like it. I would have much preferred to live in a little village or in the countryside. Much preferred to do that. But I did live in the middle of London. And I have to say, the old time Cockneys who used to live there, in like, you know, like I said, I was born in 1965. The guys I knew when I was a little kid, and the women I knew when I was a little kid, they were almost invariably very kind to like children. They just were. It was just a deal, you know. Like if you were like, I don't know, 7 or 8, and you went up to some lady in South London, in like Bermondsey, and said, "I'm lost," she'd end up with like 5 other ladies, and they would all help you, and they would all give you enough money to put you on a train to send you to where you needed to go. That was what London used to be like, really. And most blokes would have done the same thing too, just with a little bit less showy about it. But yeah, it used to be a damn good place for the most part. It did. And I think Mitch is entirely correct about this. I'm sure that like Birmingham back in the day used to be exactly the same, you know. But you know, we had a society back then that was a full trust society where you did trust people, and a little kid was someone who you would help. That's the sort of society we had back then. And like I said, I'm sure Mitch is entirely correct that Birmingham was the same. That it was. I think Aubrey makes a fairly good point here. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, back in the day, my dad would say to me, "Where are you going?" If I said I was going out, like say when I was like 9 or 10, my dad would say to me, "Where are you going?" And I would tell him, and he would say, "When are you going to be back?" And I would tell him, and he would say, "All right." But he could do that back then. It wasn't that dangerous, you know. It really wasn't. You know, I'd be going to the local park and I'd be on the swings with my little brother, and I'd go home when I said I would go home, and it wasn't that dangerous, you know.
Are we still talking about London?
No, we've expanded
okay.
a little bit here, Alman. Mitch was saying in the chat, and Mitch, by the way, said he can't join the stream because his internet's not working very well. But Mitch said in the chat that back in the day, Birmingham was pretty much like London, or like, you know, if you were a little lost kid, you could say to a woman or most blokes, "Look, I'm lost. Can you help me?" And most of them would. Which was the point I was trying to make just before you went away. Is that that was the fact? You could say if you were a little 7 or 8 year old kid and you were lost in the middle of London, you could go to some chick and someone would say, "Oh, right, all right," and eventually it'd be 5 or 6 of them, and they would they'd find a way to get you home. And most blokes would do the same thing, but with less chatting, you know.
Yeah.
They were generally quite good people back then, is what I'm trying to say. And Mitch was saying it was the same in Birmingham, which I'm sure it was.
I was quite surprised. I saw something earlier of Edmonton in London that was taken recently. And I haven't gone to that part of London in a long time. And it looked like an absolute shithole. Like, considering that's one of the nicer areas, it looked just absolutely dire. And this was near the athletic centre and just the surrounding area. And it's just everything was just covered in graffiti. Like you could see just from the look, you just know like that place stinks of weed. Right? Like yeah, it looked terrible. And there's large areas of London now, even in the nicer areas that look a little bit like that.
Oh man, look, the thing was like in the 60s, you I don't know if you remember this, you because you're a more village kind of country guy, but like with terraced housing in the 60s, everyone used to have these whitewashed stone front steps, and like women used to clean them every bloody day, so that you know it was a whitewashed stone step, because that made sure that everyone knew, "Oh no, my house is well looked after." You know what I mean? So yeah, there was a lot of good stuff back then. You know, there was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somebody in the chat is saying, "What is the most miles you ran in a day?" God, I'm trying to remember. What was the most miles I ran in a day? Would have been in the army. Would have been about 5, maybe 6. Something like it would have been in the military, mate. About 5 or 6 at most. But, yeah,
I am a terrible runner. I don't run at all. I tried to do a bit of cross country when I was younger, but I was terrible at it. But in my younger days, I did ride over 200
Mate, I
miles
never
one day.
liked it. I never liked running, I gotta say. I was pretty good 400-meter runner because I got the right build for that, but I never liked it.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I didn't. The only sports I was ever very keen on were cricket and rugby union. That was just me.
Yeah.
But no, I never liked running, to be honest. I had to do it in the army because they make you, or they used to before they allowed women in the army. But yeah, I never liked it much.
I do love walking though. Well, I'll walk, quite a lot and for miles and miles and miles. But
Me too.
I always I always thought like I had a penchant for jogging because like when I was a kid, I'd like spontaneously break into running because I just wanted to be everywhere quick all the time. I still kind of do to an extent, but no, I'm just a terrible runner. I've got a medical condition with my feet that I was born with, and so I don't know. I always feel like I'm losing balance when I'm running.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this before, man, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, I look, as I said, I was never really into running, but in the army in the old days, you had to do it because back in the old days, the army expected you to be able to carry 80 pounds of kit all day over the roughest possible terrain because that might happen. So. But yeah, I don't know. Like, but people in London used to be quite kind. Is all I'm trying to say. And when I was a kid, like I said, I was born in 1965. When I was a little kid, like I don't know, 1972, 1973, that sort of era. If you got lost in the middle of London, you could go up to almost any woman or any bloke, and they would help you out. And they wouldn't be some sort of pervert. They would help you out. The only difference was the women would get about 5 girls to help them, whereas the blokes would probably just give you the money to get on a train or something, But yeah, good people. Nice stuff.
You could probably still do that in large parts of London, but only as an adult.
I wouldn't like to try it these days, mate. I've got to say. I really wouldn't.
You like no luck in Tower Hamlets.
Yeah, all right, maybe.
Well, that's
no luck in Bermondsey, where I used to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last time I went to Tower Hamlets, so I did manage to find like the one white guy and ask him for directions to somewhere.
Yeah, fair enough. You're probably right. Adamant, anything you would like to share, mate?
No, nothing.
All right. I'm very glad that you're back on the stream this week, mate. I think unless you've got anything else you want to bring up, I think we've probably covered most of what I wanted to cover anyway.
There were lots of things actually that happened over the last couple of weeks, and I kept thinking, take a note of that. That would be a good stream subject. And I almost always forget all of them.
If you got anything else, and now is the time to do it, mate.
Nah, not that I can remember. Don't let the bastards grind you down, I suppose.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly that.
Yeah, it's never hopeless, even though it sometimes feels like it.
100%, mate. There are still those of us, including you, Armin, and myself, I hope, and people like Mitch, who are still good English and British guys. And yeah, don't let the bastards grind you down, all right? Don't. But yeah, we'll see you next week, guys. Thank you to my guest, Armin.
Yeah, no worries.
And go well. Check you soon.
Yep, night, everyone.